The slur echoed across the elegant dining room like a slap that no one could ignore. "You think a fairy like you belongs here, serving real customers?" The millionaire sneered, his voice booming, so every table in Bennett's bistro turned to stare at me, my hands frozen on the silver tray. I felt the heat rush to my face, but I kept my posture straight the way I had practiced for months while working undercover in my own flagship restaurant in downtown Chicago. Richard Vance sat there in his custom Italian suit, gold cufflinks flashing under the crystal chandeliers, his steak barely touched, as he waved his hand like I was something disgusting he wanted removed. The other diners, a mix of business executives and well-dressed couples, shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up, not even the manager who stood frozen by the wine station. I had heard worse in my life, but never in a place I secretly owned, never from a man whose investment firm was circling my company like vultures. My name is Liam Bennett, 29 years old, and for the last 6 weeks, I had been plain old Liam the waiter, trying to understand why employee turnover was so high and why my late father's conservative values still haunted the culture here. Tonight, that mask was about to crack. Richard leaned forward, his breath heavy with scotch. "Get this kid out of my sight before he ruins my appetite for good." A nervous laugh rippled from the table next to him. I set the tray down slowly, my mind racing through every board meeting I had sat through in disguise, every late-night call with my boyfriend Noah, who begged me to stop hiding. This was the moment everything would change. I looked Richard straight in the eye and spoke with a calm I didn't feel. "Actually, sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding. My name is Liam Bennett, and I am the CEO of Bennett Hospitality Group. This restaurant and every decision made inside it belongs to me." The room went dead silent. Richard's face drained of color, his fork clattering against the plate. Whispers erupted like wildfire. The manager's mouth fell open. I could see phones already coming out, but I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of my secret lift even as a new storm gathered. Richard sputtered, trying to recover. "That's impossible. You're just the waiter." I pulled out my phone, opened the executive app, and showed him the ownership documents right there on the screen. "Call my office if you need confirmation, Mr. Vance. But right now, I'd like you to leave my restaurant. Your reservation is canceled, and any future business between Vance Capital and my company is terminated effective immediately." Security appeared at the edge of the room, 2 broad-shouldered men I had personally hired last year. Richard stood up, knocking over his water glass, his expensive shoes splashing. He muttered something about lawsuits, but the fight had drained from his voice. As he was escorted out, the entire dining room erupted in quiet applause. I stood there, heart pounding, realizing that in one breath I had just blown my cover, the very anonymity I had clung to since my father's funeral, when he whispered on his deathbed that my lifestyle would ruin the family legacy. Now everyone knew. The waiter they had pitted was the man who signed their paychecks. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Noah. "You okay?" I saw the video already trending. I swallowed hard and slipped into the back office, closing the door behind me. The adrenaline crashed and the old fears rushed in. What would my mother say when she saw the news? How would my staff look at me tomorrow? And most of all, could I finally stop running from the man I was born to be? The night was far from over, but for the first time, the path forward felt terrifyingly real. By the time I reached my apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, the city lights blurred through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I kicked off my waiter's shoes, the same black leather pair I had worn every shift for 6 weeks, and collapsed onto the couch. The video of Richard's meltdown had already hit 2 million views on social media. Headlines screamed, "Waiter turns out to be millionaire CEO," but they missed the real story, the part where being gay had forced me into this double life in the first place. I poured a glass of water and stared at the framed photo on the shelf, my father and me at my college graduation, before everything fell apart. He never said the words, but his silence after I came out at 22 spoke volumes. "Focus on the business, son. The rest is your private business." Private. That word had become my prison. I built Bennett Hospitality from the ground up after his passing, turning 3 struggling steakhouses into a national brand, all while keeping my personal life locked away. Noah had been patient for 3 years, but lately his patience was wearing thin. The doorbell rang, and I knew who it was before I even opened it. Noah stood there as architect's satchel slung over one shoulder, dark hair tousled from the wind off the lake. You could have warned me you were about to blow up the internet, Liam. His voice was soft, but I heard the worry underneath. I pulled him inside and into my arms, the familiar scent of his cologne grounding me. I didn't plan it. Vance crossed the line, and something in me just snapped. We moved to the kitchen where he poured us both a glass of Cabernet, the way he always did after my long shifts. I told him everything, the months of undercover work, the late nights, reviewing employee surveys, the way I wanted to prove I could lead without the shield of my last name. Noah listened, his brown eyes steady. You were running, Liam. From your dad's ghost, from the board members who still whisper about your image for me. I winced because he was right. Last month at a company gala, I had introduced him as my close friend, and the hurt in his eyes had lingered for weeks. Now, with the secret out, the board would demand a statement. My mother in Wisconsin would call crying. And Richard Vance would not go quietly. He had already filed a defamation suit, according to my lawyer's frantic texts. Noah set his glass down and took my hands. This could be good. You can finally stop hiding. We could go to Pride together. You can tell the staff the truth about why turnover is high, the quiet homophobia in the kitchens, the way some managers still look the other way. I nodded, but the fear coiled tight in my chest. Growing up in a small town outside Chicago, I had learned early that being gay meant choosing between love and success. My best friend in high school had moved away after his parents found out. I swore I would never let that happen to me. Yet here I was 30 years old, still choosing. That night, Noah stayed over, his steady breathing, the only thing that let me sleep. But in my dreams, I was back in the restaurant watching my father's disappointed face as Richard Vance laughed louder and louder. Morning came too soon with my phone exploding. The manager from last night, Sarah, had already called 3 times. My sister Emily texted a single heart emoji and proud of you, little bro. I stood at the window watching the sun rise over the lake and made a decision. No more hiding. Today I would walk into my own restaurant as Liam Bennett, CEO and gay man, without apology. Little did I know that decision would test every relationship I had, including the one with Noah. The staff meeting the next morning felt like stepping onto a stage I had built but never performed on. I walked into the private dining room, still wearing the same black button-down I used as a waiter, only now without the name tag that read Liam, Section 4. 20 faces turned toward me, some shocked, some smiling, some guarded. Sarah, the manager who had frozen during Richard's tirade, stood at the front, her hands clasped tight. Good morning, everyone. I began, my voice steadier than I felt. Most of you know me as Liam the waiter. The truth is I'm Liam Bennett, the owner of this restaurant and the entire Bennett Hospitality Group. I went undercover because I needed to see how we treat each other when no one is watching. Murmurs rippled through the room. A young line cook named Marcus, who I had covered shifts for last week, raised his hand. So, the gay jokes in the kitchen, you heard them all? I met his eyes. Every single one. And they stopped today. We're implementing new training, zero tolerance for harassment, and full benefits for same-sex partners starting next month. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then genuine. Sarah wiped her eyes. I should have spoken up last night. I'm sorry. I shook my head. We all have moments we wish we could redo. The important thing is what we do now. After the meeting, I stayed behind with the core team, walking them through the real numbers. Turnover was highest among LGBTQ+ staff because subtle biases had been ignored for years. My father's old policies had lingered like ghosts. By lunch, the restaurant was buzzing in a good way. Guests who had seen the video came in just to say congratulations. One older couple even asked for a selfie with the brave CEO. It felt surreal and wonderful until my mother's call came through. Liam Michael Bennett, what on earth were you thinking? Her voice cracked over the speakerphone. She was in the same farmhouse kitchen where I had come out all those years ago, the smell of apple pie almost visible in my memory. The neighbors are asking questions. Your father would be mortified. I gripped the phone tighter. Dad's gone, Mom. And I'm tired of being mortified for who I am. I'm gay. I've always been gay. And I'm in love with a wonderful man named Noah. Silence stretched, then she sighed, the sound of years of quiet disappointment. Just be careful, honey. The world isn't kind. She hung up before I could say more, but the crack in her voice told me she was trying. That afternoon, Noah met me at the restaurant for a late lunch. We sat at the same table where Richard had sat the night before, now cleared and set with fresh linens. Noah reached across the table and laced our fingers together right there in public. "Feels different, doesn't it?" he asked, smiling. It did. For the first time, I wasn't scanning the room for cameras or judging eyes. We talked about the future, a summer trip to Provincetown, the apartment we had been too scared to share. Then my phone buzzed again. Richard Vance's lawyer demanding a public apology and threatening to pull a major investment from our upcoming expansion. The board was panicking. Noah squeezed my hand. "You don't owe him anything, Liam. But you do owe yourself the chance to lead without fear." I looked at him, the man who had waited 3 years for me to be ready, and realized the real test was only beginning. The weeks that followed blurred into a whirlwind of board meetings, press interviews, and late-night strategy sessions. Richard Vance did not go quietly. His team leaked stories claiming I had tricked investors by posing as staff, that my leadership was compromised by personal issues. One tabloid even dug up an old photo of Noah and me from a low-key charity event and ran it with the headline, "CEO's secret boyfriend exposed." I sat in my corner office on the 42nd floor, staring at the clipping while the city hummed 40 stories below. The board wanted damage control, a statement emphasizing professional boundaries. I refused. "This is who I am," I told them in the emergency meeting. "And if that costs us investors, then we find better ones." My CFO, an old friend of my father's, shook his head. "Your dad built this company on traditional values, Liam. We're losing contracts." I thought about my father's last words again, and something inside me hardened. Traditional values don't include humiliating people for who they love. We're changing, or I'm walking. The vote was close, but I kept my seat. That night, Noah and I cooked dinner in my apartment, pasta with too much garlic the way he liked it. He had been quiet, lately working long hours on a big project. When I asked what was wrong, he set his fork down. "I'm proud of you, Liam, but I'm also scared. What if this blows up and you resent me for pushing you to be out?" I pulled him close right there in the kitchen. "The only thing I resent is the years I wasted hiding. You gave me the courage to stop." We stood like that for a long time, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows. The next morning, I received an unexpected visitor, Sarah, from the restaurant. She carried a folder of employee testimonial stories of servers who had quit because of homophobic comments, from vendor stories of bartenders too afraid to bring their partners to company picnics. "They want you to know the culture is already shifting," she said. "Because of you." Her words stayed with me through another tense call with Richard's lawyers, who offered to drop the suit if I issued a private apology. I declined. Instead, I scheduled a company-wide town hall for the entire Bennett Hospitality Group, broadcast live to all locations. That evening, as I rehearsed my speech, Noah sat on the couch watching me with that steady gaze I'd fallen in love with. "You're ready," he said simply. But deep down, I wondered if anyone ever really is ready to stand in the light after living so long in the shadows. The town hall was set for Friday. Richard Vance would be watching. My mother would be watching. And for the first time, I felt ready to speak, not as the secret CEO, but as the man I had fought so hard to become. Friday arrived with a thunderstorm that matched the tension in my chest. The town hall was streamed from our largest conference center. Every restaurant manager, every line, cook, every hostess tuned in across 23 locations. I stood at the podium in a simple navy suit, no tie, the same way I used to greet tables as a waiter. Noah sat in the front row, giving me the small nod that had carried me through every hard moment. "Good evening, everyone." I began, the lights hot on my face. 6 weeks ago, I served tables in my own restaurant because I wanted to understand the heart of this company. What I learned is that our heart has been hurting. Too many of you have hidden who you are out of fear, the same fear I carried for years. I spoke about the data, the stories Sarah had collected, the quiet exits, the lost talent. I spoke about my father and how his love for the business never quite stretched to loving all of me. Then I looked straight into the camera. Last month, a customer mocked me for being gay in front of all of you. I could have stayed silent. Instead, I chose to stand up as your CEO and as a gay man who refuses to apologize for loving another man. The room erupted in applause that carried through the live stream. I introduced Noah, who joined me on stage, our hands clasped for the entire world to see. But triumph was short-lived. As we left the building, my phone rang. It was my lawyer. Richard Vance had filed an injunction claiming my personal agenda violated fiduciary duty and was trying to freeze our expansion funding. Worse, one board member had leaked internal memos suggesting I step down temporarily for the good of the company. Noah and I drove home in silence, the rain streaking the windshield like tears. Inside the apartment, he finally spoke. Maybe they're right, Liam. Maybe I pushed too hard. If stepping back protects everything you built. I stopped him with a kiss. No, I'm done choosing between my company and my life. If they want me to choose, then I choose us. The next 48 hours were a blur of emergency calls, lawyers, and sleepless nights. I discovered that Richard had been pressuring vendors behind the scenes, threatening to pull his own investments if they continued working with us. The betrayal stung deeper because I realized he wasn't just angry about the restaurant incident, he was angry at himself, the same self-loathing I had fought for years. On Wednesday, the board called an emergency vote. I walked in with Noah at my side and laid everything on the table: the new, inclusive policies, the projected growth from happier staff, the truth that authenticity had never been a liability, it had always been our greatest strength. The vote passed 7-3. Richard's funding was replaced by new partners who believed in our vision. But the victory felt hollow until I received a text from my mother. I watched the town hall. I'm sorry I wasn't braver sooner. Come home for Thanksgiving. Bring Noah. Tears blurred the screen. That night, Noah and I stood on the balcony, the storm finally clearing. We almost lost everything, he whispered. But we didn't lose us. I held him tighter, knowing the hardest part was still ahead, the part where I learned to lead without armor. Spring came early to Chicago, the lakefront trails blooming with runners and couples holding hands without fear. 6 months had passed since the night Richard Vance tried to break me in my own restaurant, and the world looked different from the other side of the truth. I walked the floor of Bennett's Bistro again, not undercover, but as myself, greeting regulars by name, introducing Noah proudly as my partner. The staff had changed too. Marcus, the line cook, now led our new LGBTQ plus employee resource group. Sarah had been promoted to regional director. Turnover was down 30%, and guest satisfaction was at an all-time high. Richard Vance had quietly settled the lawsuit, issuing a public statement about personal growth before disappearing from the Chicago scene. I never hated him. In a strange way, his cruelty had forced me to heal the wounds I had carried since my father's death. My mother kept her promise. Thanksgiving was awkward, but warm Noah charmed her with stories of architecture, and I caught her smiling when she thought no one was looking. Emily, my sister, flew in from Denver, and the four of us sat around the old oak table talking about everything and nothing the way families should. One sunny Saturday, Noah and I drove to the lakeside bench where we had shared our first real date years ago. The same bench from the photo that now hung in my office. He pulled a small box from his pocket and knelt right there with the city skyline behind him. Liam Bennett, will you finally let me build a life with you in the open? I said yes before he even finished the question, tears mixing with laughter as he slid the ring onto my finger. We kissed under the bright spring sun, the kind of kiss that felt like coming home after a very long journey. Later that evening, I stood on our balcony, watching the lights flicker on across the city, and thought about the boy who once hid in restaurant backrooms afraid to be seen. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who understood that real power wasn't in secret boardrooms or hidden identities. It was in choosing love every single day, even when the world pushed back. Noah joined me, wrapping his arms around my waist. Ready for whatever comes next? He asked. I turned and kissed him again. With you? Always. The company continued to grow. We opened 3 new locations with full diversity training baked into every policy. I spoke at industry conferences about authentic leadership and watched young employees find the courage to live openly because of the example we set. Life wasn't perfect. There were still awkward family calls and the occasional online troll. But the difference was I no longer carried the weight alone. True or false? Can a single moment of courage truly heal years of hidden pain and prejudice, or are some scars simply too deep to ever fade completely.